Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the joint webinar of the Law Society of Hong Kong and the Malaysian Bar entitled Structuring Cross-Border Green Sukuk. I am Louise Wong, member of the Standing Committee on External Affairs and International Legal Affairs Committee of the Law Society of Hong Kong. Before we begin, I would like to remind you some important notes on Zoom webinar. In this webinar, you are automatically muted and are in listening mode only. The chat room allows you to send chat messages to the host, panelists and attendees. And if you have any questions for the speakers, then please feel free to type your question in the Q&A box during or after the presentations. For more detailed instructions regarding the Zoom webinar functions, please refer to the chat message posted by the Law Society Secretariat. Without further ado, may I now first invite Mr. C.M. Chan, President of the Law Society of Hong Kong, to extend a warm welcome to the participants. Mr. Chan, please.
Thank you, Louise. Mr. Yap Wei Sin, Consul General of Malaysia in Hong Kong and Macau. Mr. Kalidas, President of the Malaysian Bar. Ms. Saniza Othman, Vice Chair Lady of the Malaysian Chamber of Commerce, Hong Kong and Macau. Distinguished guests and ladies and gentlemen, good morning. It gives me great pleasure to welcome you all this webinar jointly organized by the Law Society of Hong Kong and the Malaysian Bar. The uninvited visit of COVID-19 has created a new norm, preventing travel and stopping all physical meetings and seminars. Fortunately, technology has allowed us to remain connected, virtually unhindered by geographic separation and social distancing laws. It is encouraging to know that around 70 participants have registered for today's event. The Law Society of Hong Kong devotes much effort in creating international exchange opportunities for our members, both to enable them to maintain continuous professional development and to develop international connections. Over the years, the Law Society of Hong Kong has established extensive connections with lawyers' associations and legal organizations in different overseas jurisdictions, laying a good foundation for collaboration on activities that are beneficial to our members. We have been working closely with the Malaysian Bar on several occasions to advance the legal profession in both jurisdictions. To formalize our commitments to collaborate and support each other, an MOU was signed in January 2016. There's no doubt that we will continue our effort in exploring ways to foster collaboration and to strengthen our members' exchanges. In optimizing the opportunities arising from the Belt and Road Initiative for our members, the Law Society of Hong Kong places much importance on the huge business development potential in Asian countries. The Asian countries embraces international trade and was Hong Kong's second largest trading partner in 2020. And in particular, Malaysia is Hong Kong's seventh largest trading partner in 2020. That offers a vast market of substantial opportunities for Hong Kong. In response to the fast-growing Islamic finance market worldwide, the then Chief Executive of Hong Kong mentioned in his policy address in 2007 the introduction of Islamic finance and the development of an Islamic bond, Sukuk, market in Hong Kong. To promote the development, the Hong Kong government has taken concrete steps to build a conducive platform for Sukuk issuance, including amending Hong Kong laws in 2013 and 14, respectively, to provide a tax structure for Sukuk, which is comparable with that for conventional bonds, and to allow for the issuance of Sukuk under government bond program. And subsequently, in 2014, 15, and 17, 3 Sukuk of different structures and tenures totaling $3 billion were issued under Hong Kong government bond program to demonstrate to the global market the strength of our Islamic finance platform, with a view to attracting more issuers and investors to participate in the capital market of Hong Kong. The rapid development of Islamic finance market has opened up vast opportunities for the professional talents. In light of this, the Law Society has set up an Islamic Finance Working Party in 2012 with the aims to equip our members with updated knowledge and insights in the rapidly growing Islamic finance market in the world and to facilitate the development of Islamic finance in Hong Kong. And Mr. Nasir is chairing that Islamic finance group. The Working Party also makes recommendations to government departments and non-government organizations from time to time on the legal development of Islamic financial products and services in Hong Kong. Despite the pandemic, the Islamic financial industry continued to grow last year, showing its potential to become an integral part of the global financial landscape. In the upcoming session, our distinguished speakers will share with us their valuable experience and knowledge on Islamic finance, in particular the Green Sukuk, a unique capital market instrument merging green and Islamic finance. Talking about green economy, the 2021 United Nations Climate Change Conference, COP26 in short, held last month, has drawn the world's attention to the pressing need for immediate attention to combat climate change. Hong Kong is determined to support the national green goal and contribute to the world's efforts to combat climate change. Over the years, the Hong Kong government has been providing necessary market infrastructure and taking forward various initiatives with a view to developing and consolidating Hong Kong as a green and sustainable finance center in the region and in the Guangdong, Hong Kong, Macau, Greater Bay Area, in short GBA, contributing to the goal of achieving carbon neutrality before 2060 and in the mainland and before 2050 in Hong Kong. Among all the measures, the Hong Kong government Green Bond Program was set up in 2018 to demonstrate the government's support for sustainable development and determination to combat climate change and to promote the development of green and sustainable finance. Incidentally, the third batch of government green bonds has been successfully issued last month, totaling, I think, over 3.75 billion and comprising 5 tranches, including euro-denominated bonds and renminbi-denominated bonds for the first time, which were all well received by the global institutional investors. I shall leave the time for our Vice President, Mr. Amir Ali Nasir, to talk more about the development of green finance and green bonds in Hong Kong. Lastly, I hope you will find our joint seminar to be informative and rewarding experience. I would welcome ideas on how to further explore future collaboration between the two jurisdictions. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Mr. Chan. May I now invite Mr. A.G. Kalidas, President of the Malaysian Bar, to share with us his welcome remarks. Mr. Kalidas, please.
Thank you, Louise. His Excellency, Mr. Yap Wai Sin, Consulate General of Malaysia in Hong Kong, Mr. Amir Ali Nasir, Vice President and Chairman of the Islamic Finance Working Party, Law Society of Hong Kong, Ms. Saniza Osman, Vice Chair Lady, the Malaysian Chamber of Commerce, Hong Kong and Macau, Mr. C.M. Chan, President of the Law Society of Hong Kong, honored speakers, panelists, and moderators, ladies and gentlemen. Good morning to everyone. Allow me to begin by thanking the Law Society of Hong Kong for co-organizing this informative session with the Malaysian Bar. I'm looking forward to sharing my views with you today. Today's experienced and distinguished speakers come from the legal fraternity as well as the commercial industry. They will discuss the development and growth of Islamic finance with emphasis on cross-border Sukuk governance. A wide range of topics will be covered, and I firmly believe that everyone here will be able to gain a better understanding of Islamic finance and its future progress. Malaysia has always embraced its growing role in the global Islamic financial market, both in the development of its legal and regulatory infrastructure and innovation of new sustainable products. In 2021, we ranked first in the Islamic Finance Development Indicator, known as IFDI, which is a recognition and reflection of our country's strength in the Islamic banking. Ladies and gentlemen, Green Sukuk. To give a brief background, Sukuk is a Sharia-compliant financial instrument It is an interest-free bond that generates returns to investors based on Sharia law. Instead of interest, investors will receive an agreed share of profits generated by a pool of underlying assets which are partially owned by investors. Asia continues to be the most active region in the world for Sukuk issuance, and over the last few years, emphasis on the environment has been a core consideration of international investment, as pressing issues like climate change and sustainable practices are brought to the forefront of global conversation and initiatives. In my humble opinion, Green Sukuk is the right product to address global funding gaps in sustainable financing. It threads the needle between Islamic principles and eco-consciousness. The whole idea of Green Sukuk is to ensure that the focus is not merely on obtaining monetary returns for investors, but also on maintaining ethical aspects in investing, particularly the protection of our environment. That is why we see a growing interest in socially responsible financing, SRI, by a multitude of investors, new and experienced. SRIs have made steady inroads in the recent years into the realm of Islamic finance. The Securities Commission of Malaysia, SC, had introduced the SRI Sukuk framework back in 2014 to facilitate the creation of sustainable investing for SRI investors and issuers. In January 2021 this year, the SC has even expanded its Green SRI Sukuk grant scheme to encourage more companies to take on sustainable and environmentally friendly projects. I'm proud to note that the issuance of Green Sukuk has successfully been directed towards environmentally conscious projects such as hydropower facilities, solar powered projects, and green buildings in Malaysia. Let me give you some examples. In July 2017, the SC had issued our first Green SRI Sukuk. It was used to finance the construction of large-scale photovoltaic power plants in Kudat, Sabah, to promote the generation of solar electricity. We have made a lot of progress since then. As of December 2020, there was a total of 11 green and sustainable sukuk that was issued by Malaysia, amounting to ringgit Malaysia 5.2 billion, 02 billion. This made Malaysia the biggest issuer of sustainable sukuk in terms of number of corporate issuance. Tax deduction are also applicable to the issuance of expenditure for bonds and sukuk that achieve green and sustainable standards in Malaysia. In April this year too, the government of Malaysia had issued its first Sustainability Islamic Trust certificates in line with the government's recently launched Sustainability Development Goals. Sukuk framework, it is in relation to Sukuk framework. The stated objectives of the SDG, or Sustainability Development Goals, Sukuk framework, demonstrate our commitment in directing capital towards sustainable growth and development as one of the key commitments of Malaysia's Shared Prosperity Vision 2030. Certainly, with initiatives such as this webinar, the future adoption and implementation of Green Sukuk internationally is indeed promising. SRIs like Green Sukuk are in line with the Malaysian government's goal to become a green technology hub by the year 2030 and are consistent with the 2015 United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. I'm confident that the topics that will be discussed today will help bridge the gap on the implementation and adoption of Green Sukuk in both our markets, in Malaysia as well in Hong Kong. Our continued exchange of ideas will pave the way for even more innovative products and ensure that SRIs become the norm rather than the exception. By better understanding how cross-border Green Sukuk operates, I believe that we will be able to capitalize on the opportunity to reach more diverse investors and strengthen our economies together. With that, I look forward to hearing from our speakers about their thoughts on this topic. I wish everyone a fruitful time ahead. Thank you and stay safe. Over to you, Louise.
Thank you, Mr. Kalidas. We are very honored to have Mr. Yap Wai Sin, Consul General of Malaysia in Hong Kong and Macau, joining us today. Please join me to welcome the Consul General for his opening remarks. Mr. Yap, please.
Oh, thank you, Luis. Thank you, Mr. Chan, Mr. Amirali, Saniza, and also Mr. Kalidas. So a very good morning to everyone, and thank you for joining us for today's Islamic Finance webinar on structuring cross-border green Sukuk. Thank you to the Law Society of Hong Kong and the Malaysian Bar for jointly organizing this event. Today's world is faced with many challenges and opportunities, be it political, economic, social, or environmental. While there are many possible solutions to these challenges, Islamic finance and its values can be part of the answer. Since over a millennia ago, the focus of the Islamic economy has been the welfare of the society and the environment. Core Islamic principles promote inclusivity, equity, property rights, and ethics. On this note, the efforts of the government of Malaysia and our regulators, coupled with the support of stakeholders, have developed Malaysia's Islamic finance to be globally recognized. The development of Islamic finance in Malaysia has stayed true to its principles of prioritizing welfare and equitability. In Malaysia, the Islamic finance penetration rate at end 2020 is close to 40%, which is on track to reach our central bank's or Bank Negara Malaysia's target of 40% share of total financing. The resilience of Malaysia's Islamic finance sector remained very sound during the COVID-19 pandemic, supported by a steady rise in its penetration rate throughout the year. This was also helped by our domestic financial institutions' efforts to expand the sector, together with strong growth in household financing. Moody's has acknowledged Malaysia as the largest regional market in Islamic finance, and the increasing acceptance of Islamic financial products and services among the multi-ethnic Malaysian population, regardless of race and religion, is a sustainable trend and will continue to be so in the foreseeable future. This is largely due to the strong regulatory framework by both the Central Bank and the Securities Commission of Malaysia. In addition, and of interest to this webinar, is that according to the Malaysia International Islamic Finance Center, Malaysia led globally with the largest Sukuk market in 2020, accounting for more than 45% of the world's outstanding amount, or about $260 billion US. Malaysia's Sukuk issuances have shown how Malaysia has used Islamic finance to fund and shape a more sustainable future. And encouragingly so, we have seen more Sukuk issuances that are tied to the principles of sustainable and responsible investments. Indeed, Malaysian Sukuk issuers have developed an appetite for such forays, from funding renewable energy projects such as solar and hydro, to supporting social purposes such as microfinancing and education. This reflects an increasingly strong commitment towards sustainable development through Islamic financing products. Islamic finance has continued to attract investors. In Malaysia in 2020, our stock market and fund management industry showed that Sharia indices have outperformed conventional indices for 2 consecutive years. As a result, there is more demand for Sharia-compliant investments, and total Islamic assets under management have grown from 22% of overall assets in 2017 to 24% by end of 2020, with the total value of 217 billion ringgit. Under Malaysia's Shared Prosperity Vision 2030, the Malaysian government has set forth 15 key economic growth activities. One is to develop an Islamic Finance Hub 2.0, in which Malaysia is well positioned to lead globally. We have made good progress on this front, as in August, the government of Malaysia issued our first ever award-winning digital Sukuk online, the Sukuk Prihatin, where the subscription rate had exceeded the target of close to 700 million ringgit. Recently, Malaysia has also emerged as one of the world's leading Islamic fintech hubs, housing various Islamic fintech startups. And based on the Malaysia Digital Economy Corporation's Islamic Fintech Report, almost 30 Islamic fintech providers were operating in Malaysia as of 2020, which is actually more than the UK, the UAE, Indonesia, as well as the US. A key contributing factor to this is Malaysia's comprehensive regulatory guidelines to regulate and systematically develop the fintech industry. Other initiatives include the collaboration between the public and private sectors in using Wakaf structures for social objectives. This is evident from efforts carried out by the central bank and other banks with the establishment of My Wakaf. Also, the Ministry of Environment and Water and Yayasan Wakaf Malaysia has launched the Wakaf Air, or Water Wakaf, and proceeds from the Water Wakaf will fund projects related to vital water services in rural poor areas. The Shared Prosperity Vision 2030 also highlights potential and plans to become a leading player in the $3 trillion halal market. The halal industry covers not only food-related products, but also pharmaceuticals, cosmetics, self-care, health items, and other sectors such as travel, media, and recreation. And Malaysia continues to lead in this sector, especially on halal certification. And today, Malaysia is one of the main sources of reference for over 150 countries in areas such as the halal industry's development and governance. This is reflected in Malaysia's #1 ranking in the Global Islamic Economic Indicator, where we lead in areas such as halal food, Islamic finance, pharmaceuticals, as well as Muslim-friendly travel. Ladies and gentlemen, although Malaysia's Islamic finance has grown significantly and now enjoy wide acceptance and adoption, we should continue challenging ourselves to see how Islamic finance can further elevate our people's socio-economic well-being. I'm happy that this is what today's webinar is also trying to do. We can improve Islamic finance's risk management and reduce misconceptions by standardizing the many aspects of Islamic financial products and services. We can also work towards trying to harmonize the world's many Islamic financial markets to holistically strengthen the Islamic finance industry. And I think the area of Sukuk, or structuring cross-border green Sukuk, is as good a place as any to start and work on. And I'm also pleased to note that Malaysia and Hong Kong enjoy close relations in many fields in which finance and legal affairs are just two of many. I feel assured that today's webinar will continue to contribute positively to the further strengthening of these ties. And with that, I wish to once again express my appreciation to all involved for organizing this event. And thank you, and I wish you all a fruitful and productive webinar.
Thank you, Mr. Yap. Let us now begin the sharing by the Malaysian Bar. May I now pass the time to our first speaker, Ms. Goh Chai Ling, partner of the Adnan, Sundra and Low, who will provide a general introduction of green Sukuk as used in Malaysia. Ms. Goh, please.
Good morning and thank you. I'll start off the introduction with what green Sukuk is, but first and foremost, what green instruments are. Green instruments are essentially regular instruments with one main key element, and that is proceeds raised from green. Such instruments are used exclusively towards financing projects with environmental benefits. Green instruments have become globally recognized as an effective means of directing investment capital towards enhancing resource efficiency and reducing the impact on environment and global climate. And that leads us to the question as to what green Sukuk is. Similar to green bonds, proceeds raised from green Sukuk are intended to be used to fund environmental friendly projects. However, green Sukuk has two labels to it. Firstly, it being a Sukuk, and secondly, being green. The first being Sukuk, as mentioned briefly by Mr. Khalidas in his opening remarks, are essentially Islamic interest-free bonds that generate returns to investors without infringing upon the principles of Islamic law, also known as Sharia principles. Sukuk is an Islamic financial certificate in compliance with Sharia. They are backed by a specific pool of assets, and instead of interest, investors receive an agreed share of profits generated by the pool of underlying nominated assets, which are partially owned by the investors. And the other label being green, that means Sukuk which are in compliance with green bond standards, principles, and frameworks. As mentioned, the key element of being green is that proceeds raised from green Sukuk are utilized towards financing eligible green projects to meet sustainable development goals. Whilst there's no single set of global definition for eligible projects to be funded by green instruments, the key aspect of green financing is that if the proponent commits to investing the funds raised in green assets such as renewable energy, low carbon transport, low carbon buildings, sustainable water management, sustainable waste management, and sustainable land use. The green feature complements the underlying principle of Sukuk, given that both green instruments raise funds for a specific purpose and both have environmental, ethical, and social principles at its core. One may ask, what is the benefit of issuing green Sukuk? Other than meeting sustainability requirements, one of the advantages of green Sukuk is that it has the potential to attract both green investors and those with Sharia compliant mandates, which appeals to a broader set of investors as compared to non-green Sukuk or a conventional bond. A non-green Sukuk would only appeal to non-green investors while excluding green investors. And at the same time, a conventional green bond would likely only appeal to conventional green investors whilst excluding investors with Sharia compliant mandates. With that, I'll move on to my next segment to give you a broader perspective of green Sukuk in Malaysia. Malaysia, being at the forefront of Islamic instrument and sustainable financing, has pioneered the green Sukuk issuances. According to a report published by World Bank, as at last year, Malaysia has the largest number of green Sukuk issuances, while Indonesia has raised most through green Sukuk issuances. In July 2017, Tata Energy, a Malaysian entity, issued a AA3 rated Sukuk based on the Sharia principles of Istisna and Ijara, that being purchase order and leasing, of some 250 million ringgit in aggregate nominal value under the Securities Commission's Malaysia Sustainable and Responsible Investment (SRI) Sukuk framework. The SRI Sukuk, being the world's first green Sukuk, received the highest rating by Cicero, that being the Center for International Climate and Environmental Research, Oslo. The Sukuk was issued to finance solar power projects in Kudat, Sabah, Malaysia. Another issuance would be by Permodalan Nasional Berhad, a Malaysian state-backed investment entity, who issued the first green Sukuk in 2017, which proceeds were solely utilized towards property financing. The proceeds financed the Merdeka 118 Tower in Kuala Lumpur, which aims to secure the leadership in energy and environmental design certification. The Sukuk was issued based on the principles of Murabaha and Wakala under the Securities Commission's SRI Sukuk framework, as well as the Asean Green Bond Standard. On this note, just to let you know that Celine will be presenting a case study on the Merdeka ASEAN Green Sri Sukuk program shortly. This year, the government of Malaysia issued the world's first sovereign US dollar sustainability Sukuk, where proceeds raised is intended to be used for eligible social and green projects aligned to the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals agenda. The Sukuk is a unique one as the underlying assets are sustainable assets, being vouchers representing travel entitlement on Malaysia's light rail transit, that's the LRT, the Mass Rapid Transit, MRT, and also the KL monorail network. Being the first sovereign issuance with such assets in the structure of the Sukuk, the issuance showcases Malaysia's global leadership in Islamic finance, reinforcing the country's position as the world's largest Sukuk market. Before moving on to the framework or standards used in Malaysia, I also would just like to highlight the initiative taken by the government in embracing green financing. The idea of green financing is indeed becoming more and more important in Malaysia. The 12th Malaysia Plan, which is a development roadmap for 2021 to 2025, is committed to set in place the structural conditions of a green economy. Amongst the key points to note in the plan would be for greenhouse gas emission to be reduced to 45% of GDP by 2030, in line with the Paris Agreement, and renewable energy to account for 31% of Malaysia's total energy capacity by 2025. To achieve this, the master plan includes putting in place green financing mechanism and innovative incentive schemes to promote investment in green infrastructure, including energy, transport and housing, economic instruments, environmentally motivated subsidies, and the existing green financing incentives will be leveraged to support businesses in greening their activities. The Malaysian Securities Commission had also in September this year launched the third master plan, which will serve as a strategic framework for growth in Malaysia's capital markets over the next 5 years. One of the agenda under the master plan would be to shape a stakeholder economy with SRI and Islamic capital markets, that being ICM. The SC is focused on facilitating the intermediation of capital to sustainable and responsible businesses through SRI and ICM to cater to stakeholders' needs. In the master plan, the SC has also addressed the need for more companies to transition to a net zero future. Moving on to green Sukuk frameworks in Malaysia. Whilst there's no global definition as to what green Sukuk is in most jurisdictions, the green bond and Sukuk markets employ a voluntary framework that establishes best practices for investors. Such frameworks are developed in consultation with market regulators and industry players. Widely accepted green Sukuk frameworks include the Sustainable Finance Framework, published in 2019, developed by the Islamic Development Bank, the ASEAN Green Bond Standards, published in 2017 by the ASEAN Capital Markets Forum, the Green Bond Principles, published in 2014 by ICMA, that being the International Capital Markets Association, and Sustainable and Responsible Investment SRI Sukuk Framework, published by the Securities Commission in 2014. In Malaysia, the green Sukuk issued are largely based on the SRI Sukuk framework and the ASEAN Green Bond Standard. These frameworks and standards are an extension to the existing Sukuk framework, where all other requirements in the relevant guidelines issued by the Malaysian Securities Commission will continue to apply. I'll be touching on both of these frameworks briefly. Firstly, the SRI Sukuk framework, which was launched by the Securities Commission of Malaysia in 2014, with a view to expand the capital markets through sustainable financing and investment. That's in line with the initiative set out by the Securities Commission's Capital Markets Master Plan 2, that is to promote socially responsible financing and investment. And in 2019, the SRI Sukuk framework was revised to enhance disclosure standards, reporting requirements, as well as the role of external reviewers to align with international standards and best practices, which places importance on the transparency in respect of disclosure requirements. So then one would ask, what then would the requirements of an SRI Sukuk be under the framework? So under the Securities Commission's guidelines, an SRI Sukuk refers to a Sukuk in which the proceeds will be applied exclusively for funding of activities or transactions relating to eligible SRI projects, where SRI projects are projects which are undertaken with the aim to achieve objectives such as preservation of environment, natural resources, conservation of use of energy, promotion in the use of renewable energy, reduction of greenhouse gas emissions, or generally the improvement of the quality of life of society. The core components, as I've shared on my screen, of the SRI Sukuk framework consists of four areas, namely the utilization of proceeds, where proceeds raised must be only utilized for purposes of funding activities or transactions relating to eligible projects. The process for evaluation and selection, where the issuer for such Sukuk must establish internal processes for evaluation and selection of projects. Management of proceeds, where issuers are encouraged to ensure that proceeds allocated for eligible projects are deposited into designated accounts or otherwise tracked in an appropriate manner. And last but not least, reporting. The key reporting requirement under the SRI Sukuk framework is that information that includes information on the amounts allocated for the eligible project, the amount actually utilized for the eligible project, and also unutilized amounts, if any. And if where there are such unutilized amount that is placed for investing pending utilization, such also must be disclosed. Also, what is expected of an issuer is to disclose the list of eligible projects itself, in which the proceeds have been allocated to, and actually a brief description of the eligible project and its impact or expected impact on the environment. A key requirement under the SRI Suku framework is that information relating to the issuer and details of the issuer's SRI Suku framework must be made publicly accessible via a designated website to be disclosed by the issuer. And such information in the designated website must be made available at the point of issuance and throughout the tenure of the Sri Suku. If a second opinion by external reviewer is available, such too will need to be made available on the designated website. I'll touch on the second opinion in a moment. Moving on to the ASEAN Green Bond Standards. Following the SRI Sukuk framework, which was introduced by the Malaysian Securities Commission in 2014, in November 2017, the ASEAN Capital Markets Forum, ACMF, released the ASEAN Green Bond Standards, which are a set of voluntary guidelines based on the ICMA principles, with an aim to provide more specific guidance on how the ICMA Green Bond principles, which are internationally accepted, are to be applied across the Southeast Asian nation. The set of guidelines has been revised in October 2018, whilst the ICMA Green Bond principles provide broad range of principles on green bonds, and the ASEAN Green Bond Standards provide more specific guidance on how the green bond principles are to be applied across ASEAN. And additionally, there are also additional key features of the ASEAN Green Bond Standards, as I shared on my screen, that being, firstly, to create a green class asset for the ASEAN region. That is, issuers or issuances of green instruments must have a geographical economic connection to the region. Secondly, the exclusion of fossil fuel power generation projects, so as to provide further guidance on investors and issuers as to what qualifies as green to mitigate the risk of issuers greenwashing their projects. Thirdly, continuous accessibility of information. This information would include the process for project selection and use of proceeds, as well as external review reports. Similar to the SRI Sukuk framework, such information should be made publicly accessible from websites designated by the issuer. And prior to issuance, such information should also be included in the issuance documents, including management of proceeds. The fourth one would be more frequent reporting. To increase transparency and investors' confidence, issuers are encouraged to provide a more frequent periodic reporting. Under the standards, it is recommended that the issuer must report to investors at least on an annual basis, if not more frequent. It is also recommended for the issuer's annual reporting on use of proceeds to be supplemented by confirmation of such use by external reviewer, along with any relevant updates of the external reviewer. And last but not least, point of external review, this pertains to the requirement for external reviewers to have the relevant expertise and experience in the areas of which they're reviewing, such that the reviewer's credentials and scope of conduct review must be made accessible from the designated website of the issuer. Much like the SRI Sukuk framework, the ASEAN Green Bond Standards have also recommended for the issuance of a second party opinion, where the experts should be independent from the issuer's advisor. A second party opinion is essentially to provide an assessment on the alignment of the issuer's green framework, whether it complies with the standards, similar to that of a credit rating agency providing independent credit rating of a bond or a sukuk. In particular, it can include an assessment of the issuer's overarching objectives, strategy, policy, and process relating to environmental sustainability, and an evaluation of the environmental features of the type of project intended to be financed with green proceeds. As an example of example of a second party opinion, in respect of the SRI Sukuk issued by Tadao Energy, the second opinion was actually issued by Cicero. The opinion was based on their own sets of principles and methodologies in providing an assessment on Tadao Energy's framework. And as for Tadao Energy's framework itself, it received a Cicero dark green rating, being the highest rating from Cicero. I'm afraid that is all I have on the introduction to Green Sukuk in Malaysia. With this, hand over the session to Celine to speak about an example of the Green Sukuk as mentioned earlier. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Goh. Let's welcome our next speaker, Ms. Celine Rangithan, partner of Zo Rafiq and Partners. Ms. Rangithan will give an overview of a Green Sukuk program established in Malaysia under the Sharia principle of Murabaha. Ms. Rangithan, please.
Good morning. Thank you, Louise. Let me just share my screen. Hi, good morning to you all. And thank you to the Law Society of Hong Kong and the Malaysian Bar for organizing this webinar. As highlighted, I'm going to discuss a case study on a Green Sukuk program that has been established in Malaysia. Due to the time limitation, I will just highlight key points. The program in question that we will be discussing today will be the PNB Merdeka Ventures Sendirian Berhad's Merdeka ASEAN Green SRI Sukuk program of Ringgit Malaysia 2 billion. As this is a Sukuk program and not only a green Sukuk, as Shailing had mentioned earlier, the program would also need to comply with Sharia requirements as well. The Sharia principle adopted for this particular program is the Murabaha via Tawarruk arrangement. In a simplified manner, Murabaha means a sale and purchase of assets where the cost or the nominal value of the Sukuk and the profit, which is the markup, are ascertained. And Tawarruk is the purchase of commodity at a deferred price and the selling of the same to a third party. I will later briefly just set out the Sharia structure based on this. The provision of the Sharia principles that are adopted for a Sukuk program are actually set out and regulated by the Securities Commission. The program name for this deal is Merdeka ASEAN Green SRI Sukuk Program. Now, in order for the program to have ASEAN Green within its name, it has to comply with the ASEAN Green Bond Standards as published by the ASEAN Capital Markets Forum. And similarly, in order for the program to have SRI in its name, it also has to comply with the Sustainable and Responsible Investment Guidelines under the Securities Commission LOLA framework. This program was established to part finance the integrated development and construction of Warisan Merdeka project, which is constructed on the largest land parcel in the historic Merdeka Stadium and National Stadium enclave, which includes the construction of the iconic Tower Merdeka 118. Merdeka being independence in Malay, and 118 being the height of the Merdeka Tower, having 118 stories. Merdeka Stadium is significant in Malaysian history as it is the site of the formal Declaration of Independence in 1957. And upon completion, Merdeka 118 will be the second tallest building in the world and the tallest building in Malaysia and Southeast Asia. This program is governed under Malaysian laws and it is subject to Malaysian regulatory provisions. So we are subject to the Capital Market and Services Act as well as the Securities Commission LOLA framework. In 2015, the Securities Commission introduced the LOLA framework to enable most corporate bonds and Sukuk to be lodged with the Securities Commission and immediately be available for issuance without the need for prior approval of the SC, which was what was required prior to the introduction of LOLA framework. It creates an ease for the issuers to now establish a program. Okay, the structure that is set out currently on my screen is a more detailed Islamic structure that complies with the Sharia requirements. But what I will do just for ease of understanding how it sort of works in comparison to a normal green bond or normal bond, I will just in a simplified manner highlight this procedure that has been adopted pursuant to the Murabaha principle. So based on a purchase undertaking that the issuer will give, the facility agent on behalf of the Sukuk holders will acquire the commodities, which is the underlying asset for this transaction, from the commodity supplier at the Bursa Suk Al Sila platform at the price equivalent to the Suku issuance proceeds. Now, the Bursa Suk Asila platform is very interesting and quite innovative because it is a commodity trading platform dedicated to facilitate Islamic financing. And it has been established in collaboration with Bank Negara Malaysia, Bursa Malaysia, and the Securities Commission, with the support of the Malaysian Palm Oil Board, Malaysian Palm Oil Association, and Malaysian Palm Oil Council. The underlying transaction of buying and selling the commodities are actually genuine transactions and not just merely on paper. Once the facility agent has purchased or acquired the commodities, it will sell the commodities to the issuer at a deferred price, which will comprise the Suku issuance proceeds plus a markup or the profit that will be generated throughout the tenure of the program. And this creates the obligation by the issuer to make payments to the Sukuk holders, and the Sukuk that is issued by the issuer will represent the Sukuk holder's right to the deferred sale price. How does the issuer then receive the proceeds of the Sukuk issuance? It will be by them selling the commodities to a commodity buyer at the commodity platform, and the amount will be equivalent to the Sukuk proceeds it is planning to raise. So that is a gist in a very simplified manner on how the Murabaha structure sort of works under a Sukuk program. The Merdeka ASEAN Green SRI Sukuk program has led the way for many subsequent green Sukuks to be issued. And it is the first green Sukuk to be issued under the ASEAN Green Bond Standards, which was adopted by the Securities Commission pursuant to the LOLA framework back in 2017. The issuer being PNB Merdeka Ventures Sendirian Berhad is a wholly owned subsidiary of Permodalan Nasional Berhad. PNB is one of the largest fund management companies in Malaysia, and PNB also stood as guarantor for this program. The principal advisors was MIDF Amanah Investment Bank Berhad, and together with RHB Investment Bank Berhad, they acted as joint lead arrangers and joint lead managers. Amanah Raya Trustees Berhad took on the role as Sukuk trustee, and MIDF took on the roles of security agent and facility agent for this deal. Now we move on more into the green aspects of the program and and to tie this up with what Chai Ling had mentioned earlier on the ASEAN Green Standards that was issued by ACMF. So one of the requirements, or one of the things that the issuer did, was to establish a framework, and the framework was established to ensure transparency and disclosure of how it intends to comply with the ASEAN Green Bond Standard. And the framework is available at their designated website that I have set out in the slides. And this designated website is the website where the issuer not only sets out its framework, it also sets out all other disclosure requirements that is intended to be given to the investors throughout the tenure of the program. In the framework, the issuer has highlighted the project to be financed, which is the Merdeka 118, as well as how it intends to comply with the green bond standards. To assess the issuer's framework, the issuer had obtained a second party opinion from Cicero, the Center for International Climate Research, and Cicero had given a rating based on their assessment of the framework. And Cicero had given a rating of medium green for the Merdeka ASEAN SRI Sukuk program. Just to highlight something interesting on this slide here, if you look at the photo side by side, the design of the Merdeka 118 tower is actually inspired by the silhouette of Tunku Abdul Rahman when he chanted Merdeka during independence. So that was the inspiration in the design of the Merdeka 118. Under the ASEAN Green Bond Standards, it sets out the requirements in order for the program to be identified or designated as an ASEAN Green Sukuk. There are 4 core components for the green bond in the green bond principles that were adopted by the ASEAN Green Bond Standards. Now, the core components are further broken down into various different smaller requirements. But what I will do for today's discussion, because we don't have much time, is just to sort of highlight the salient provisions under this program that adopted and how they achieved the relevant ASEAN Green Bond Standards. The first one is use of proceeds. As highlighted by Chai Ling earlier, it only can be used for certain eligible projects. And in this case, we're looking at eligible green projects. So the Merdeka 118 Tower is designed and constructed to be a green building. And Merdeka 118 will be a model for workplace safety and sustainability, and it aims to secure multiple green building certifications through the Leadership in Energy Environmental Design 2009 Core and Shell Green Building Index and Green Me. So by achieving these classifications, the Merdeka 118 Tower will be a green building, and therefore the construction of the Merdeka 118 Tower will qualify under the green project eligibility of the ASEAN Green Bond Standards. The other thing that the issuer needs to do is basically go through the process for evaluation and selection. And there are a few things here which they need to achieve. One of it being clear communication to the investors on inter alia their environmental sustainability objectives. And this is something that also would have been assessed in the second party opinion. So how the issuer intends to achieve the environmental sustainability objectives is that the features for the Merdeka 118 Tower will cover certain areas, for example, sustainability, site planning and management, water efficiency, material resource conservation, indoor environment quality, and sustainable construction. And these objectives have been set out in the framework that they have uploaded for the investors' review at the designated website. The other thing that the issuer needs to achieve is their process for evaluation and their selection must be supported by the external review. And this has been achieved by the second party opinion issued by Cicero. Management of proceeds. The issuer must have internal procedures set up to track how the proceeds are managed from the point of issuance. Because the purpose of the program was for the construction of the Merdeka 118 as well as certain ancillary purposes that relates to the cost for the program as well as for the project, various different Sharia compliant accounts were set up to very clearly demarcate and identify and control the use of the proceeds. What they had done was to set up a Sharia compliant proceeds account 1, which not only captured the proceeds of the Suku issuance, but also equity contributions from PNB. And the proceeds from this, the funds from this proceeds account 1 is transferred to project account 1 to meet construction costs. And whatever is required for recurring fees or for payment of profit would then be transferred to the profit and expense account. And for the minimum required balance, that is then transferred to the finance reserve account. And to ensure that the funds in these accounts are properly managed, the accounts are operated by the security agent, and the accounts are also charged as security for the Merdeka and ASEAN Green SRR Sukuk program, and this will protect the interests of the investors. The fourth core component is reporting. As Chai Ling had mentioned, not only is there a requirement for an annual reporting, but the issuer should be guided to give ad hoc reporting to investors. The idea is so that the investors know and are aware of how the monies are managed as well as the progress of the project. So for this particular Merdeka ASEAN Green SRI Sukuk program, what the issuer agreed to do is to provide an annual reporting to the investors by uploading or submitting the report to the designated website. And they also had obtained an external review on the reporting. So the external review is sought to assess their reporting and to give an independent verification and assessment. The reporting will be given throughout the tenure of the program and intends to cover the original amount that was earmarked for the project, how much has been utilized for the project so far, what is the unutilized amount, and where are these unutilized amount placed, and to the extent possible, what is the impact on the objectives from the project. So the idea of this reporting is so that the investors are constantly updated and aware of the ongoing progress of the project and the funds. So what the issuer has done for the past 3 years is to engage Ernst & Young to provide an independent verification on the management of the proceeds and the reporting use of the proceeds as well. So this gives that additional comfort to the investors. And the verification as well, the reports are uploaded and available at the designated website, which I had highlighted earlier. So that is in a gist how the PNB Merdeka Ventures Green SRI Sukuk program intended to achieve the objectives and the requirements under the ASEAN Green Bond Standards. Thank you very much again for having me today.
Thank you for the valuable insights from which I'm sure we all have a better understanding of the topic. Moving right along, allow me to introduce the Law Society of Hong Kong speakers. Firstly, it is our pleasure to have Ms. Saniza Othman, Vice Chair Lady of the Malaysian Chamber of Commerce, Hong Kong and Macau, joining us today to introduce the work of the Malaysian Chamber of Commerce. Ms. Othman, please. Please go right ahead.
Yes, good morning. Thank you, Louise, for the introduction. My name is, first of all, let me begin by thanking the Law Society and the Malaysian Bar for organizing this webinar this morning. So while I'm a lawyer in the field of alternative dispute resolution, I'm not actually here to talk about the law today. I'm actually going to give a quick introduction about the Malaysian Chamber in Hong Kong and Macau, MACHAM for short, and why it's beneficial to do business in Hong Kong. So let me start with the history of MACHAM and who we are. So MACHAM was formed in 2014. I and 43 other individual and corporate founding sponsors pulled together seed money to create the chamber. So while we are a fairly young chamber, in this short span of time, we have become the largest Southeast Asian chamber in Hong Kong. We have over 500 members, and more than 40% of them are non-Malaysian. So we're fairly international, and you don't actually need to be Malaysian to join our chamber. Our members have a very diverse background. We have, of course, lawyers. We also have accountants, bankers, doctors, engineers, of course, business owners and companies. Pre-COVID-19, when travel was permitted, we made yearly road trips to various parts of Malaysia, both East and West, and we encouraged direct investments into Malaysia. And of course, when travel was permitted, we had Malaysian ministers visit and speak to MACHAM and to the Malaysian community at large in Hong Kong. We are also very active in CSR activities. Earlier this summer, because of COVID, the COVID situation in Malaysia, we raised about ringgit Malaysia 450,000, which works out to about Hong Kong $820,000 for our We Care donation to the Orang Asli communities in Selangor and Perak states of Malaysia. And also we've raised about 12 million Hong Kong dollars for our student trust fund to help Malaysian students in Hong Kong. So the second bit of my presentation is about why do we do business in Hong Kong. So having called Hong Kong home for over 20 years, I'd like to share my thoughts about Hong Kong's unique value proposition. First of all, we are a highly open economy. In terms of FDI outflow, we rank fourth globally at US $102.2 billion. Secondly, doing business in Hong Kong is relatively straightforward. We have a very simple and low tax system. And we have a strong infrastructure of lawyers and accountants to help businesses get set up in Hong Kong. Third, Hong Kong is, of course, a global financial center. I believe we are the third leading global financial center in the world and first in Asia. So, of course, comes with that, we have a free flow of capital and information, and I think that is critical to our success. And fourth, our very unique one country, two systems. So we are very much a part of China, but we have a common law jurisdiction advantage in that no other country in the world has these two advantages. And of course, we have an independent judiciary. Last but not least, Hong Kong is a super connector between China and the rest of the world. So just across Hong Kong's border is the Greater Bay Area, which has a market and a population of over 70 million people. And that's equivalent to a GDP of 1.6 trillion. And that accounts for over 20% of China's net worth in households. So finally, how can Meicham help you? So of course, we're always here to help. If you wish to learn more, please scan the QR code on the PowerPoint and get connected. So thank you for your time.
Thank you, Ms. Hoffman. Last but not least, may I now invite Mr. Amirali Nazir, MH, JP, Vice President and Chairman of Islamic Finance Working Party of the Law Society of Hong Kong, to share his insights on this topic from the Hong Kong perspective. Mr. Nazir, please.
Okay, good morning, everyone. I'm very glad to be participating, Jal, with you again. Pity we haven't seen each other. But let me move straight into my part. We don't actually have a green sukuk in Hong Kong. So what I thought I'd do is try and introduce to some of the members in Hong Kong who may not know what a sukuk is, as well as trying to do some of the green bond elements and see how they could fit in with a green sukuk, should someone wish to formulate a green sukuk, and also what laws we have in place which would allow a green sukuk to be established in Hong Kong right away if somebody so wished to do so. So it's just a very quick run through. This one. Okay, so I'll start with Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, which we always do, and in relation to Islam. Just a quick I'm just going to quickly give you a 101 to the power of 10 is course on Islam, quickly to set the scene. So this is Dome of the Rock, an important part for Islam. If you're going to talk about Islam, it's please partition your brain into two spaces. They're the same in some senses. So a loan is a card, a bond is a sat or plural sukuk. And so that's what I'd like you to do in looking at green sukuk. Look at it, but bear in mind that the principles and values are different, but easily understood if you look at this particular side. But it does require you to partition your brain in order to be able to understand it. I've given you some important words. We are dealing with one particular contract. It's murabaha, and so it's a sale and profit, purchase and sale form of structure. A SAC is an asset-backed certificate. So halal and haram are important aspects in the sense as what is permitted and what is not permitted. And finally, one of the prohibitions, apart from alcohol, pork, is interest is not permitted. So that is haram. So economic framework is slightly more complex, as you've seen from the previous speakers. But I'd like to ask you to keep an open mind and an eagerness to learn and understand a new concept. So quickly, as I've said before, halal is something which is, I think I've got the Arabic wrong there. One says haram and both. My mistake. Those who can read Arabic is wrong. But halal on the left is what is permitted. haram on the right, which is unlawful and not permitted. And those are things that are not permitted. So if one is going to structure Sukuk, the underlying contract, the underlying thing must not contain anything which is haram, which is on the right, like pork, interest, alcohol, etc. Although when we're talking about green Sukuk, we're really talking about the end product of the finance and how it is to be used in order to make it sustainable. And so it's at the other end, in the output level, where the green Sukuk really comes in order to continue the aspects of sustainability. My apologies. Okay, so very quickly in Hong Kong, the SFC in Hong Kong announced a strategic framework for green finance. In 2019, December, there was a survey on integrating ESG factors and climate risk in the assessment and management, and that was published by the SFC. So the 2018 Strategic Green Plan framework had 3 elements to it: enhancing listed company, asset manager, investment product disclosures. So primarily they're focused on disclosures on ESG factors, especially environmental and climate. The second one is facilitating development of green or ESG related products and increasing awareness and capacity building. And the third one is promoting Hong Kong as a green finance center. So they did, this is some of this, I've extracted some parts of the survey on integrating environmental, social governance factors. And this is what it showed you. You have 65% acknowledged that ESG factors could be a source of financial risk, and 60% practice responsible ownership as well. So these are the important results of that survey. Another aspect was ESG information disclosed. Asset management, they had information on ESG policies, results of ESG risk assessment, including climate risk, a list of ESG investment products. They had scenario analysis, deviations from the ESG, and also ESG experience and knowledge of the staff. So those were important informations that were disclosed in the survey. And this shows you the funds under management. And you can see it's an important element of funds under management because it talks about a large corporation, small corporation. And these figures, again, from the survey show the number of firms. And you can see those over 100 billion, they're about 9%. But the ones we're talking about here, if it's more than 8 billion, then of course they'll be the larger corporation. Then you've got those in the 7% onwards on the right-hand side, the last 3 on the right. So the 2019 key comments were scope and applicability, threshold, as I said, the AUM for large fund managers, governance issues, availability of data, and disclosing that, including the emissions, and then having an implementation timeline. So the initial stage of the adoption was focusing on climate risks and also the type of investment structure that they have. And of course, making references to TCFDs, which I'll be looking at, and adopting, of course, a 2-tier approach. So what is a 2-tier approach? Well, following the feedback that they received, we're looking at focused on climate-related risk at the initial stage, applying, considering whether or not it's a CEIS. And they all agreed with the proposal that the task force on climate-related financial disclosures, focusing on disclosures, was the key way to look at it. Also, looking at enhanced standards for those who had larger funds under management. Okay. So the baseline requirements in Hong Kong: governance, risk management, investment management, and disclosures. And they apply to all fund managers. Of course, those which are larger fund managers, then you look at a more enhanced versions. So risk management, implementation of plan on scenario analysis, assess portfolio carbon footprint, and of course, disclosures as well. So we have your engagement policy and portfolio carbon footprint as well. So disclosure and risk management are key elements to the enhanced standards. So finally, the 4 key questions is it a collective investment scheme with investment discretion? Then are there climate-related risks relevant to the fund? there has to be an assessment of that. And if climate-related risks are relevant and material, then of course applied to the larger fund managers as well. Then you have what I've said in the previous slide. And then finally, who is the person responsible for the overall operation of the fund? And those are key components to the establishment of green funds. And within the SFC documentation, they've got a flow chart. You can look it up on the web. This just gives you a highlight of the flow chart in looking at the different risks that would be involved. It takes too much, but it just gives you an idea of what has to be followed. Green bond history, as you know, Islamic finance was announced in 2007 in Hong Kong. Our president has given you the 3 Sukuk issuances that we have in Hong Kong. But as far as green bonds are concerned, they were announced in 2018. The goal is 175 billion Hong Kong dollars, green bonds over 5 years. So green bonds are announced in 2019, and November 21, we had 3 offerings. And you had, you can see them, they've got 3 offerings there, which I'll look at in detail here. So the first was a 5-year tranche. You can see priced at 0.635%, it's 22.5 basis points. And the next one is 10-year tranche. And we also had a 30-year tranche. And you can see the allocation was 65% to Asian institutional investors, 20% allocation to Europe, and 15% allocation to US. The importance of this slide, of course, shows that it's a green bond, and there was a take-up of 65%. Now, you look at that, the first one, 5 tranche, was 5 times, attracted 5 times the issuance. The second one, 5 times. And the third one was 7 times issuance. That surely shows you the need for funds. Now, if we were to compare this with the need for green sukuk, is of course there are many institutional institutions which have to be Sharia compliant across Asia in order, for instance, insurance companies and many other institutions which have to be Sharia compliant. And the more products that we have out there, the better it is for the Sharia compliant economies. So Hong Kong would do well, given these statistics, to try and consider a green sukuk, following on from the 3 sukuk that is already issued, and it's done quite well on them, although the pricing was also, although the pricing was competitive, there was a lot of demand for it. And so if you would follow these statistics, there is definitely room for a green sukuk to be issued in Hong Kong. Can it be issued in Hong Kong? Oh, here, this is, sorry, this is again looking at the ratings. It was issued under the Global Midterm Note Program, listed on the stock exchange, Hong Kong as well as London, assigned AA plus rating and AA minus by Fitch, and the Hong Kong Monetary Authority acts as Hong Kong government's representative in the green bond offerings under the government's green bond program. So it has a green bond program, and therefore, because it has a green bond program, you could easily have a green sukuk program within the green bond program. And of course, the proceeds is very important. The sustainability aspect will be credited to finance or refinance public works projects that provide environmental benefits and support the sustainable development of Hong Kong, as has been highlighted by my friends earlier. So, and these, of course, are the participants. You can see CIB and HSB joint global coordinators, BNP Paribas, Citigroup, etc., were joint book runners. Now, these entities were also entities that were involved in the 3 sukuk issuances by Hong Kong government. So the green bond program just highlights Hong Kong's green bond program here, and it was well received. So this gives you aspects of the fund and the project and how it will apply to the sustainable development and transition to low economy. So quickly, for those who do not know what a sukuk is, it's IOFI, regards it as a certificate of equal value representing undivided shares in ownership of tangible assets. The assets particular project for special. So actually, when a person buys a Sukuk, they're buying almost like a share in the entity. So it's a part ownership. World Bank regards Sukuk as an interest-free bond that generates return to investors without infringing the principles of Sharia, which I've already identified has specific restrictions. So Green Sukuk is an Islamic product with the aim of providing sustainable environmental climate-friendly projects. So usually one looks at the Sukuks which are developed on an underlying Islamic structure to produce a profit or return for its investors. Here, it's the other end where Sukuk ensures that the output is towards sustainable development. So these are some of the aspects that Green Sukuk would have to look at. Is it mitigation or adaptation? I haven't put all of them. The ones that the Hong Kong Green Sukuk could consider would be transport systems, which have development in Hong Kong and across China, industrial facilities within the GBA, buildings and even waste management could be a huge issue as cities become larger and larger with over 5, 10, 20 million people. Waste management is an essential feature of the management of a city, and that could be used for that kind of mitigation. Adaptation, of course, in Hong Kong, you could have matters relating to energy. We, of course, use coal, but that could be adapted to having wave, wind, solar, or even waste. So it's this different value system that has to be looked at. This diagram shows you how different departments put together to enable to create. Now, Malaysia, I must say, has been very successful. And this diagram shows you how the government of Malaysia, including all the other participants with, who are part of government, outside government, banks, etc., have participated to put a system which interrelates and allows the development of Islamic finance. And it's done that better than any other countries that might be Islamic. And that, I think, is a success of Malaysia. It started early, and in fact, it was protected in adopting that in the financial crisis. And therefore, it's a system which has developed in stages, but a very strong system. And this gives you an idea how other countries should actually look at the different value systems and participants' responsibilities within this structure. This is just to give you a highlight of all the factors that a Sharia scholar, and of course those who are designing a Sukuk, would have to look at. And the parts at the bottom, the 3 pillars, they all relate to, actually, if we look down to basic principles, the principles of sustainable development, because within those principles lie ESG principles within themselves. Okay, everything above that is the prohibitions, but below that is actually inbuilt into the system itself. These are some of the contracts you can have. The ones in red are the ones that are allowed under our law. Okay, and we are here talking about Murabaha. So we had the Islamic Finance and Belt and Road Initiative in 2016. If you see this map of the Belt and Road countries, and then you see the map of Islamic different schools, Islamic region, so it's almost the same, right? And therefore that gives you the potential to develop Islamic finance as Malaysia has done so well. These are some of the features that one looks at in screening. Not going to go to them, but just give you a highlight for those in Hong Kong do not know. The screening elements, and up there, one of the contracts is Murabaha. So sustainable power can be clean. It's, as I said, inbuilt in Sharia and inbuilt in equitable features to ensure sustainability. So quickly, this is the law that we have, Cap 112, Schedule 7A. Sections 2 provide for the basic structure of alternative bond scheme, which comprises a bond arrangement and bond investment. If you want to have a bond, it must have two parts to it: the bond arrangement and a bond and the investment arrangement. And then Section 4 talks about the specified alternative bond scheme and its alternative bond scheme whose investment arrangement is always within the specified investment arrangement. So I'm going to be talking about Murabaha as a specified investment arrangement, right? And then the other sections deal with the different aspects of record keeping, assessments, etc. So these, as I've said, I've given you the section numbers. We can have lease. I'm not going to use the Arabic words. You can have a lease, profit sharing arrangements. There are two contracts under there. We're looking at the third one, which is Murabaha, which is purchase and sale, and Wakala agency, right? So these are what are allowed in Hong Kong. The Hong Kong government in setting up the alternative bond that it's called, or Sukuk, it set out this diagram to show you the upper part is the bond arrangement and the lower part is the investment arrangement. And so you can see you have the bond holders, the initial bond holders, which is a bond arrangement, right? And you have the different, the SPV and the undertakings that are given. And the investment arrangement talks about how the bond issuers interrelate with the bond holders, with the originators. And then you have the bond issuers as well towards the end. Which is similar to the diagram that my colleagues had from Malaysia had given. So this is a more complex version. I'm not going to go through the whole thing, but it tells you the bond arrangement, the investment arrangement. It's the other way around. And then you can see on the left the different types of contracts, right? And in order to be a qualifying conditions, you can see the qualifying conditions that are set out for tax circumstances, etc. And see the qualifying conditions on the right-hand side in order to be a bond arrangement. So investment arrangement, bond arrangement, those are highlighted within that. So on top of this, so you would structure a Sukuk based on these principles within our law, and then you'd apply the green bond principles. And of course, if it's more than 8 billion, then you'd be large, extra features would be applicable for large funds under management. Right? So this is our law. And once you've got that, you also get the special tax treatment as well. So Murabaha, very quickly, it's a simplified version. If a bank doesn't act as a bank, what it does is, say somebody wants to buy machinery, the bank buys machinery at 100,000, it sells the machinery at 110,000 to the customer pays back in 10 installments, and there's an agreement of purchase for that machinery. So that 10,000 extra is the profit for the bank, not the interest for the bank. In this case, the bank has to work harder. It doesn't just get its money by giving money. It has to go through that extra part on the right. So it is a relationship of buyer and seller, is an installment sales, if one calls it, and one looks at it from the traditional Western finance, and there's always deferred payment. So instrument aspects of it under our law, Section 8, is there must be a purchase and sale. There's a markup, there's an investment arrangement, and there's material transaction of the asset. And once you've done that, then it'll be a specified asset between the originator and a bond issuer. So this is a diagram given by the Hong Kong government on a Murabaha structure. See the bond arrangement at the top, where you can see at the start, you have the bond issuer, you have alternative bonds or Sukuk, and you get the bond proceeds. The bond issuer then gives it to a third party, which is similar to what my friend said before. Then the originator also has the asset given to a third party, and then the proceeds, acquisition costs, etc., on a deferred payment, right? And at the end, the originator gives it back to the proceeds to the bond issuer, and there's redemption of the bonds. Our speakers from Malaysia also talked about Tawarruk arrangement as an additional feature, and Wakala as well, which are simply principles of agency which are special features within those structures that were identified earlier. And this again shows you the Murabaha Sukuk structure in more detail at the beginning and end of the term and how it would flow. Of course, we don't have a product to give you, but this is what's been identified by the government. And so it gives you some semblance of understanding that within Hong Kong, we already have systems in place, we already have the law in place, we already have these structures in place in order for a green sukuk to be issued in Hong Kong. Of course, there's tax treatment. There must be a Hong Kong connection. There must be an association specified scheme. It must be listed, marketed, issued in good trade, and cleared by the monetary authority. So those are some of the Hong Kong connection aspects of ensuring that you get the tax benefit as well. But on top, this is just the tax benefit. On top of that, you'd have the green bond principles, which I've highlighted above. So that's a very quick run through of the possibility of issuing a green sukuk in Hong Kong. And I hope that's been a good comparative with what my learned friends from Malaysia have described in more detail of their structures. Thank you.
Thank you for the fruitful sharing, which has inspired us very much. We will now proceed to the panel discussion and Q&A session. Please be reminded to type your questions in the Q&A box if you have any questions for the speakers. May I now pass the time to our moderator, Mr. Jal Othman, partner of Shuk, Lin and Bok and member of Islamic Finance Committee of the Malaysian Bar. Mr. Othman, please.
Thank you, Louise. Let me just quickly welcome back my panelists, the three of them, Amirali, Celine, and also Chai Ling. Welcome to this panel session. It's a short one. I think Louise has just given us 30 minutes, I think. We probably would have wanted an hour, but we've got 30 minutes. And I think we will probably do it in this way. We get some chat moving as the questions come in, and I'll try to field some of those questions as we see along here. So let me just start off first. Is everyone comfortable?
Great, thank you, Jal.
I'm sorry. I think I've tripped on my first step already. I must also welcome back Saniza. Hello, Saniza. I see you there. Yes. Sorry. Well, let me just start off. You know, in the green sukuk space, we speak of COP26, we speak of JC3, we speak of the UN EP, FI, TCFDs, we speak of the CCPTs for taxonomy. So it's an alphabet soup. It's an alphabet soup on everything else. And it's a mixture of both global and domestic laws and principles. It's complicated because most, if not a lot of them, are aspirational best practices. They're not hard laws. So if we take all of this together, my first question to all of you is the legal advisory, is the legal structuring, and is the legal documentation for green sukuk terribly more complicated than the conventional bonds, than the non-green sukuks? I start off with this question because I think that's quite relevant to the other stakeholders, the issuers and also the financiers. If the lawyers are coming on board to tell them it is one set of complicated structure, then they may think a little bit longer and harder. If the lawyers come back and say, well, you know, it's different, it's not overly complicated, but it's different. So perhaps maybe if I can pose that question first, and let me just maybe start in the order of Celine, Chai Ling, and Amirali, if you don't mind, let the ladies go first.
Sure.
Have I tripped again and not included Saniza as well? My goodness. You're fine, right? Okay.
Thanks, John.
All right. Okay.
I don't think it's overly complicated. I think with the introduction of the green bond standard or the green bond principles, because it is new at that juncture, people are unfamiliar with it. But having done, and I'm sure Chai-Ling can attest to this as well, you know, having done one or two green Sukuk programs, you kind of understand what the requirements are. And yes, there are additional things that are needed. There are more things that the issuer will need to comply with and adhere to. For example, the setting up of the framework, the designated website, and then the second opinion verification, and you know, constant reporting to the investors as well. Yes, there is more things that they will need to do, but I wouldn't say it's complicated in the sense that once people are familiar with it, it becomes more of a norm rather than a complication.
Okay, Celine. So good news from Celine, not complicated, different things that needs to be done. Chai-Ling, do you have any other angle?
Yeah, completely agree with Celine. I think maybe I'll just highlight this. From a documentation perspective, what is really different from a green Sukuk to that of a non-green Sukuk, it's probably the inclusion of a few extra covenants. And, you know, these are just essentially reporting covenants and positive covenants on the part of the issuer to so that they would adhere to their obligation to report, to disclose as per, you know, the guidelines, or rather the standards and the framework.
Okay, so that's also good news. So,
Yes.
Amirali, you've you know, for the sake of drawing gender lines, you must disagree with the ladies, right?
Absolutely, yes.
Yeah, you cannot just concur. Yeah, we've got to hold our fort down.
Exactly. No, well, I don't have experience in green Sukuk. Of course, what I can look at for Hong Kong side is we have disclosure requirements. And we don't actually have specific Sharia disclosure requirements, because we don't have one. But if one were to be adopted, then it wouldn't be that different from the disclosure requirements that one has. Because in essence, if you were to follow the strict Islamic principles, they're already built in to the system. It's just that we are now saying, oh, you should have green. But actually, as I've said, you've seen my diagram, many of the aspects that are supposed to be looked at, in fact, we've not been looking at them, is inbuilt into the system. So sustainability is something which is built in, and all one has to do is revive those principles that are built in. Because, you know, when doing the Sukuks, people don't really see whether or not, as you were telling me before, the development of the Madreka, expects you to look at the site, the development, green issues, electricity, all of those things, right? But if you look in Islam generally, it expects you to do all those things. It expects you to respect the earth. And inherent in that is looking at everything that's best in order not to have wastage, right? It's part and parcel of that. So it's just formulating that within, and in fact, we don't need to be regulated. If you were to take it upon yourself to build those systems in, then you would automatically be compliant. But again, the difficulty would be that if you take on international standards, these standards are going to change over time, and given COP, there's going to be greater pressure on governments to enhance these provisions. And for obviously China is got a very strict timeline in order to be carbon neutral, and therefore it's pushing itself. And therefore that suggests that there will be more statutory requirements in relation to, you know, ESG requirements. So yes, it is something that will change constantly, a bit like the internet.
So that's the first big takeaway, Saniza, for Meishan. Not overly complicated, in fact, not complicated at all. It's different. And we know why is it different. We know what to do. And really it's something that from your chamber's perspective should be encouraged as an instrument that the investors want to pursue. I've got one question that's come in, but I just want to put mine in first before that other one. And I want to come to this question on the other end of the spectrum. We speak of at the outset, we speak of the inception of the structure, and we conclude that's fine and everything is good. The other end of the spectrum is something that concerns issuers, which is really the three letters which they fear most, which is the EOD, the events of default. Yes, these are the ones that sort of strike terror in the hearts of issuers. I suppose the burning question for issuers is, in a green Suku, how different would the events of default be? In particular, would the events of default in the green Sukuk be more onerous to them? So if we've taken care of the start, where we tell them go for it because it's not complicated, we now want to take care of the other end of it in order for us to sell it all the way, or in order for Saniza to sell it, right? Which is the event of default. So now I'm just going to go back on the same order again. Celine, if you can start. I just hope we got quite a couple of questions we want to go through. So if you are guys who just come in with sort of short, punchy answers, that'll be very good. Sure. So Celine, and then Shailing, and then Amirali. Yeah, no real additional onerous EODs just because it's a green Sukuk. For example, the one that I highlighted, the normal construction sort of events of default are included. But should the issuer not be able to meet the sustainable features that they have set out within their framework, it is not an event of default. Okay. Not any more onerous. That's also good news. Shailing, anything to scare the investors? Anything to say, well, hang on a minute, there's one whole set of events of defaults that you guys don't know what you're getting yourselves into?
No, I agree with Celine. There aren't any other additional events of default just because it's green. That's good or onerous on these issuers. Okay, that's good news. And I'm really from the Hong Kong side of things. Some Hong Kong tends to like to overkill things sometimes. So in events of default, do you see more onerous or peculiar events of defaults attaching to green Sukuk?
Well, at the moment, if there were one, we only have disclosure requirements. There isn't anything, so actually we're not that strict. The only difficulty I would suggest would be that if one sets out a particular standard and then the international standards change, I think in the contract you'd have to specify that it would be at a particular time, because by the time you structure a particular product and you've got standard A and that moves on to standard B, A1, you have to make sure that you're only going to be responsible for standard A and not standard A1, because as I said, I think in this environment, it's constantly going to be changing. So if you have as you've got a 30-year tranche, 30 years is a long time. There's going to be a lot of development in 30 years.
Yeah. Okay. So for the moment, where we are, good news, not more onerous events of default. Okay. I'm going to field this first question that's come in. It's from an anonymous attendee. And essentially the question is this. The question is, whilst the ESG advantages are very clear and very real, the question for the panel is, what about the financial and commercial advantages for the issuer? So in other words, I think the question is, well, everything is fine on the ESG front, but what about the money? And the color of money is also green, as we know. So the question then is, really, is there an advantage for the issuer? Yeah. So Celine? The Malaysian government has set up or have provided certain tax incentive for those issuers that are undertaking the green Sukuk. I don't know exactly the extent of the tax incentive, but I know there are certain tax exemptions that have been provided by the Malaysian government. And I suppose the second element that would be beneficial to the issuer
will be the fact that, as what Chai Ling had mentioned earlier, the investor base will be broader than if it's not.
Okay, right. Chai Ling?
Yeah, just to elaborate on what Celine just said, I think there's an incentive given by the SC, and if I'm not mistaken, it's about 90% the cost of review that you'll be able to claim. Yeah.
Which is good.
So, but there is a subject, there is a maximum of 300,000 ringgit. But if you are not to breach that 300,000 ringgit limit, then it's 90% of the actual external review costs that you'll be able to claim.
Right. And I know I'm already in your slides. You have also touched on the various exemptions of various benefits for, in terms of stamp duty and other costs, transactional costs. Is there anything in Hong Kong that gives you or gives the issuer a greater financial or commercial advantage?
Well, we have a very low tax structure anyway. It's probably the lowest in the world. We don't have a very complex tax structure, and even the tax exemptions that have been provided are to put it on at par with the other bonds. That's why it's called alternative bond. So even though you have additional requirements within the Sukuk structure, there's parity in the sense that there is an additional tax where you have that structure in place. So from that perspective, yes. But for my part, as time goes by, there will be an increased demand by investors and others to have green. And it's actually the intangible asset in other areas that becomes useful in savings and the other aspects which are going to be improving. So one has to really develop. We don't actually have tax incentives as you do, but that would be, at the moment, the green bonds are used for infrastructure development, and there's going to be a need for the more sustainable infrastructure development you get, the better results you get in the sense that you get saving of electricity, saving of time. So it should be ultimately beneficial to the issuer in lower cost.
Yeah. Okay. Sanisa, if you want to add anything, just let me know and jump in. Yeah.
No, I think that, yeah.
Yeah. Well, I think also the other point, and I speak from the Malaysian context, I think the regulators are very conscious and mindful to achieve not only regulatory parity for green sukuk, but also tax neutrality and also some other fiscal advantages, not solely from the transaction cost perspective, but also from the perspective of the bank's business and also the issuer's business. So I think there are a couple of layers that's involved. I wanted to extend that question a little to the panel. The other nature of the green sukuk is also this, I think, that the documentation, unlike most other legal documents, and the lawyer's DNA for legal documents are the documents are very cold, they are very hard, and they are very heartless, right? The language is very penalizing and compensatory in nature. When you step into the realm of green sukuk, it demands that we sort of move and depart a little away from that DNA. If I'm not wrong, it requires the tone to be more remunerative and more rewarding. For example, the greener you are, the less you pay back. In the most simplistic form, right? The principle, the buy-in being that from the banker's perspective, saving the earth is not an option, and that's the intangible return on the money, right? So I suppose in a roundabout way, I'm asking my panel whether you agree also with the point that not only from a transactional cost perspective, but from a repayment of monies borrowed perspective, it may also be advantageous to the issuer in two respects. One, the first point that I've made, which is the greener you are, the less you pay back. And secondly, because saving the earth is not an option anymore, we will eventually reach a point where you will have to tap onto these funds and no other funds. So I think generally all of you would agree on that point as well. Am I right? Yeah. So
I think on
yeah.
on top of that, I think what will happen. I mean, future spectacles, but it seems to me that given the increasing nature of the severity that we're facing in relation to climate change, governments are going to start becoming very strict in a short period of time, bringing in various additional fines, etc., like you get for plastic bags, storage. If you're not efficient, then that's going to cost you in the long run. The advantage of green sukuk is that built into the system are the principles that would be necessary to cloak yourself to defending from these ultimate changes that are going to be made in a short time. So if you start developing something infrastructure now, which is not green, you're eventually going to have to pay the price because you can't rebuild a building with 118 floors, with that structure. So the advantage now is the investment you put in now will give you savings as governments start loading on penalties for not being green. And that's going to happen. So I think it's an investment which will pay you back dividends in the future. The more green you can become now, the better is going to be your protection from these sanctions that are bound to follow.
Yeah, I think it's a very good point, Amirali. And in fact, we are already seeing that, as Celine has also alluded to that, in terms of the Green Building Index and the LEDs and so on. So that's very clearly the case. I've got one other question coming in. I want to ask mine first. That is one of the prerogatives of the moderator. Let me ask mine first before I take that one. And this is a question of transition sukuk. Now that's a sukuk that's not really green yet, and that's a brown sukuk, right? So transition sukuks are sukuks where, and I think for the very first time, a couple of days ago, the Malaysian Securities Commission chairman has alluded for the first time in public to this statement, and the Securities Commission is pushing hard on this front. In other words, going into a space for issuers which are transitioning to green but are not green yet. And this is a huge area where the Securities Commission say we should pay attention and time in, because this is time well invested, because these are the people that eventually will go green. So you are, it is an incubation pool at the moment for this. And to finance these people, we finance it through the concept of a transition sukuk. Right? Now, this has got a relevance to the question which has come in also. So I'm sort of doing justice to the attendee as well. The question was in relation to the independent green opinion that's critical in the green sukuk, right? And that question is in the context of how available, how accessible, how reliable is such an opinion. And of course, it comes with a price in terms of cost. So I'm going to get you all to sort of tackle that question separately, but I'm using that as one of an example or a reason why there is a push for transition sukuk, because for people who are not totally green yet, obviously you can't get a green opinion if you're not green. But there is now this emphasis or this encouragement to focus on that area. So against that backdrop of a not so green sukuk, quick views from all of you in terms of, do you feel that this is an area that lawyers and all stakeholders should actually spend time in? Or do you feel that, well, no, we've got enough on our plate trying to handle the green stuff. We've really got no time to handle the would-be green people. So maybe quick views across, and maybe Chai Ling, Celine, and then Amirali.
Yeah, I think, just coming back to the question, I think we should pay attention to, transitioning Sukuk. To answer your question, whether from a brown Sukuk wanting to be green, whether it's difficult or rather what has to be looked into, just to put it in perspective, it's very much like probably the equator principles, the one in respect of corporate loans, bridging loans, that governs members who are part of the Equator Principle Association. So what this second opinion expert reviewers do is that they come in, assess the project, assess the framework that's being put in place in these soon to be green issuers. And when they find something that, it's not quite, it doesn't really quite meet the standards of those principles, framework, what they do is they will come up with an action plan, right? A recommendation as to then how to change these internal processes, framework, or even the handling of the project to make it green. So it's not all that difficult to be.
Right, the transition. Yeah. Okay, and that's good. Celine?
Yeah, I think just echoing Chai Ling, it's a good space for at least the stakeholders to start looking into to see how. I mean, at the end of the day, like Amirali said, everyone is going to move towards green. So might as well we start now, and might as well we give a helping hand now. Look into what needs to be done in order to assist in that transition. And what I'm seeing now in the market is a sort of hybrid programs that are being set up, where the issuer sets up a program under which they can actually issue Sukuk that complies with various different guidelines. So you've got sustainability linked Sukuk being issued under that program, and at the same time they can issue SRI Sukuk or green Sukuk. So it's good that these hybrid programs are coming about so that the issuer can tap into that program as and when they are in a position to actually comply with the requirements in order for them, for example, to be green or to be SRI. Yeah.
Right. What we call the green option. Here. Amirali, transition Sukuks in Hong Kong. Any room for that?
Well, it's very interesting. 20 years ago, this is an example. I've done many of these, which is not the green Sukuk, but the example is that how to transition from conventional to Islamic. There were many of my clients who were totally conventional. Their businesses were in alcohol. Their businesses were mostly, 100% on interest loans run by bank. And it was transitioning from conventional to Islamic, how to restructure the whole company, the organization, including the family trusts, to make them Sharia compliant. So that took a hard look at all the different elements of the business, and then restructuring the finance part so that it became Sharia compliant. It even meant selling off certain ships in order to get sufficient cash in order to restructure it. So that's how a number of families transition from conventional to Sharia compliant businesses. And I think if I apply the same principle, of course, going green is a bit more complex because of the international element in it, but it really means one looks, and lawyers have the advantage of looking at what is going to be the future by looking at the international agreements and what's been looked at in COP, and then predicting what's going to happen, and looking and advising the clients, which is not necessarily legal work, but transitions into legal work if you have a sight of the principles that Celine and Shelling have looked at just now, the international standards, in order to advise clients now how they can reorganize themselves in order to be green, as it were, and then better positioned to address the regulatory regimes, the disclosure regimes, which are going to become stricter now, rather than firefighting. So fire prevention rather than firefighting.
Yeah, yeah, and I think in both our countries, we currently don't have a transitional Sukuk framework. So I think what we're going to do right now is going to take advantage of this platform. And can I suggest to presidents of the both bars that we form a working committee to jointly to come up with some framework for transitional Suku, with the input from Saniza's chambers, because I would expect that you would have more brown than green people, Saniza, on your side. And so this will be very relevant to them. And let us form this working committee, and we can take this and put it in as a paper to both our regulators respectively. How about that?
Yes, excellent idea.
Yeah, this is what you call hijacking the session, right?
No, it's fine. It's meant to be hijacked. This is our mutual session.
Right. Okay. Now I see Louis is appearing, which means she's indirectly telling me watch out for the time. I've got about 3-4 minutes. Just to finish off, I think this question that's come in. Remember the question, the green opinion, very necessary, very critical. Question is, how accessible is that opinion? How reliable or dependent is that opinion? And I think the reliability was made in comparison to ratings, reports, and so on, right? So from that perspective. So very quickly, answers, Celine first, please.
Yeah, one of the requirements when the report is issued is that the credentials of the relevant opinion provider will have to be included as well. And that is then provided and uploaded at the designated website. So the investors would be able to form their own opinion as to how credible the opinion, the second party opinion that has been issued.
Okay. Right. Charlie?
Okay, also just to add on, we've got two main rating agencies here in Malaysia, one being RAM and the other one being Remark. So RAM, as a rating agency, they've also set up their own independent, their own consultancy when it comes to assessing these green frameworks, meaning it's an extension of the services that they provide now.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, that's good. Amirali.
It's going to be a necessary cost of the product, which is green, and therefore it's an international and local and government requirement. It's an additional cost, but as I say, in the long run, it's designed to reduce costs.
Yeah, I think precisely the point, right? We got to, it's going to happen when we got to invest in it now, right? I thank you very much. I think we've run out of time. I think as a takeaway for Saniza, so if your members are asking you why green, I think you can clearly see the answer is why not.
Yeah, no, I'll agree with you. So we've seen similar issues with respect to non-conventional Sukuk things, right. And it's about the dollars and cents. So, you know, if you're going to go green, I mean, we look at this from if you're looking at it stepping away from the Islamic finance side of things, it's a very similar issue. You would have to look at the dollars and cents to see if it makes commercial viability. And if you can demonstrate that, surely why not? Because on the back of that, you're also doing good. So yeah.
Correct. And we are hoping the convincing case is yes, we can demonstrate that there is financial and fiscal advantage in that for all the reasons that we sort of spoke about. So I will have to close this, everyone. I know we're all a little wanting more time, and I'm going to hold Louis to that and give us another session, another occasion, because we don't have enough of that. And I'm going to be very nationalistic at this point before I close it. And I'm going to have to tell everyone, I'm very proud of my two Malaysian ladies. I think I don't know Suku, and I've sort of sat through this, and it's excellent. So, that's prerogative for the moderator, really. So here we go, flying the Malaysian flag. So well done. So I'm going to hand this over
Find
back.
your Malaysian flag here as well, Joe.
This is a Malaysian show. This is a Malaysian show. Yeah. Right. Well, thank you everyone very much. And I think I'm going to hand this back over to Louise, and she's going to take us through to the closing ceremony. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Mr. Othman, and all the speakers for the insightful discussion. Before today's webinar comes to an end, may I invite Dr. Syed Adam Al-Habshi, partner of Shuklin and Bok, and co-deputy chairperson of Islamic Finance Committee of the Malaysian Bar, to deliver his closing remarks. Dr. Syed, please.
Thank you, Louise. Assalamu alaikum and good morning to everyone. When the chairman of the Islamic Finance Committee asked me to give the closing remark, I wanted to prepare a 20-page closing remark, but then the secretariat informed me that you only have 2 minutes. So based on that, I think I will go in straight to first thank all of the Malaysian Bar as well as the Law Society of Hong Kong for organizing this joint webinar on the structuring cross-border green sukuk this morning. I think I concur with Jal in the sense that I've learned a lot from these sessions, from our esteemed speakers, and I hope that we can actually frame up that working group that Jal has mentioned, so that we can work together further and develop the concept of this cross-border green sukuk in the future, inshallah. I have to probably mention the names to thank Mr. C.M. Chan, the President of the Law Society of Hong Kong, Mr. A.G. Khalidas, President of the Malaysian Bar, His Excellency Mr. Yap Wei Sin, Consul General, Consulate General of Malaysia in Hong Kong, Ms. Chai Ling, Ms. Celine, Ms. Aniza, Mr. Amir Ali, as well as my partner Jal Othman. Thank you very much for this wonderful session this morning. The takeaway points are very heartwarming in the sense that we see positive remarks in relation to green sukuk, and we can also see that the regulators are leading the way towards implementing green sukuk in the finance industry. What I can say is that it looks complex. It is complex, but it's not complicated. There is some additional work that needs to be done, but it's not that difficult to be done. On that note, I think it would be best that, for now, I would like to mention the words of Imam Ali, radiallahu anh, or Imam Ali karamallahu wajhah, the fourth caliph of Islam, when he said this: what a difference there is between two kinds of actions. A deed whose pleasure passes away, but its ill consequence remains, and a deed whose hardship passes away, but its reward stays. Green sukuk is definitely not to say it's very hard, but it's a bit complicated. It's a bit complex, but not complicated. But the moment that we do it, as Amir Ali has mentioned, you will see that the rewards will stay, and you will get the dividends and the investments in the future. I think with that, on behalf of the Islamic Finance Committee of Malaysian Bar, again, I would like to thank everyone, to all the participants who have joined us, stayed throughout these sessions. And Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi ta'ala wa barakatuh, and thank you very much. Over to you, Louise.
Thank you, Dr. Syed. Last but not least, may I invite Mr. Amirali Nazir, MHJP, Vice President and the Chairman of Islamic Finance Working Party of the Law Society of Hong Kong, to conclude this joint event. Mr. Nazir, please.
Thank you, Louise. President A.G. Khalidas, Ms. Saniza Uthman, Jal Uthman, Chailing, Mr. Syed Adam, Celine, thank you very much for attending today. Ladies and gentlemen, it's been a pleasure to cooperate with you on this seminar. Thank you again for attending today. I'm confident that we've all gained useful knowledge through today's sharing and have a better understanding of the opportunities and benefits brought by development of Islamic green Sukuk in Malaysia, and green bonds in Hong Kong. As our President CM Chan said earlier, the Law Society is very grateful to have this opportunity to remain connected with the Malaysian Bar amid the pandemic by co-hosting our first virtual event. Without doubt, both associations will continue our joint effort to facilitate professional exchanges among our respective members, as well as the business community through organizations and such events, and of course, future training events. Globalization and technological advancement create new opportunities to collaborate as well as to ameliorate the issues caused by distance and isolation. So Malaysia and Hong Kong have a long and important close trading partners with an increasing trend of foreign direct investment into Malaysia. Legal practices traditionally operating within national boundaries feel the need to diversify into new areas that require multi-jurisdictional expertise. Our panel has given you very good insight as to the kind of work that is being done. This is, of course, all blue ocean strategies that we're dealing with. It's unknown, but it is very important. While we're talking about green, it is, of course, blue-green. So I thank you all for participating, and I look forward to participating with you in the future. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Nazir. I'm sure we all have some takeaways from today's webinar and have a better appreciation of the topic. On behalf of the Law Society of Hong Kong and the Malaysian Bar, we would like to say a big thank you to the speakers, moderator, and all of you for joining us today. Hopefully, when the situation allows, we can meet you all again in Hong Kong or Malaysia. Wish you all a pleasant day. Thank you.